and musicians. Really blessed by the music this morning. And one of the ways that we show gratitude is by singing, isn't it? Singing kind of reminds us sometimes if we don't feel grateful, we can sing and give thanks. And that is, of course, why many of the Psalms are written as Psalms of thanksgiving, to remind us to be thankful. I think gratitude is something that you have to learn in life, and sometimes you forget about being grateful. I think it's something that you have to cultivate. You know, sometimes we don't naturally sense gratitude, especially the longer that, say, you have a certain thing. I remember being really grateful for having a car and being able to drive when I was 16, right? And yet the longer that you go, well, you just take being able to drive somewhere for granted until you can't drive somewhere. Until you have a health issue or a surgery or something happens to the vehicle, and then you can't just drive somewhere, and then you realize, wait, I've been taking this for granted for a long time. See, it doesn't seem to me that the world tends toward gratitude. It seems like we tend towards taking things for granted. And you might argue with this a little bit because we all like to think of ourselves as grateful people, I think. You might say, well, I feel grateful all the time, Pastor Collin, and maybe so. That might be something that you learned over a long period of time. Usually, people have to intentionally create a gratitude practice. It's not something that naturally happens. I think that's something we cultivate, and because I think the actual tendency is to take things for granted. And the reason I say this is because I have children. And when I get out the ice cream to give my kids a treat, I might pull 2 or 3 flavors of ice cream out of the freezer. And of course, when I do this, my children instantly say, "Oh, Daddy, thank you for this ice cream you've decided to give us. It is not that we deserved this treat. I'm just grateful to have anything as lovely as this. This selection of flavors is fine with me, Father. Scoop however much you like into whatever bowl you choose, and I will be so grateful to have it." Not exactly. Not exactly. I mean, they do say all those things, just not in a British accent. I mean, that's exactly what they say. They just don't have that, they don't sound like that. No, I'm kidding. It is more common that there is some screaming involved in the ice cream distribution. Why? I don't know. Some complaints about the flavors on hand, or how much is given to this person versus that person, or what sort of bowl or receptacle is used to give the ice cream. I mean, it's all up for grabs. But then I will say, and this is real, I will say, hey, how about we say things like this? Daddy, I love ice cream. Thank you for this treat. This is great. Thank you so much. I want to have ice cream all the time. Now, you know what's interesting is that there is kind of a light bulb that once they start going in this direction, it kind of rolls and gains steam, and then they start saying things like, "Oh, this is so good. Oh, I'm really enjoying this. Oh, thank you so much." There's usually a very sudden change, and it's almost like, "Oh yeah, I forgot. I shouldn't be unhappy about this. I should be grateful." They start asking politely for things they would like rather than demanding. It's amazing the change that gratitude can bring into a situation. But what's remarkable is how it seems it is something that we have to be reminded to do, that we forget about it. And there's a story in Luke's gospel where Jesus is confronted with 10 lepers, and the story is about how most of them just forget about gratitude. Let me read this story from Luke's gospel, chapter 17, Luke 17, verse 11. I'll put it on the screen if you'd like to follow along there. Or I won't put it on the screen. Somebody will put it on the screen, and I'll give thanks to them for that. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance. So as Jesus is traveling to Jerusalem, he encounters some lepers. He's going into a village, Luke says. Doesn't tell us what village it is, but it does give us a sense that the lepers probably lived outside the village. Jesus is going in. He wasn't in the village because the lepers don't live in the village. They live outside. They would have been kind of social outcasts because they had this skin disease. And actually, the word leprosy probably covered lots of different skin diseases. It might not be what we would call Hansen's disease today, what we would call leprosy. It might have covered several different kinds of skin diseases. But the main issue was that they were contagious. These could be spread around, and they were quarantined. This was the original quarantine, people. And so they were required to live outside of the villages in groups, probably relying on some charity to survive. They may have planted their own crops in some of these groups, but they would have been in a fairly desperate situation. But they had probably heard about a man who had healed other lepers because, Jesus had healed other lepers. They had probably heard about this. They had probably heard about Jesus. And so when he was entering their village, they stand at a distance and they call out, Luke says in verse 13, stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. Jesus, Master, have pity on us. When he saw them, he said, go, show yourselves to the priests. Now the lepers call out for pity, and maybe they expect Jesus to come over to them and to heal them. Because, when Jesus had previously encountered a man with leprosy in Galilee, this is in Luke chapter 5, you can go in Luke chapter 5 and read the other encounter. He said, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus had touched that man, actually touched him, which you didn't typically do with lepers. You didn't want to touch a leper. But instead of Jesus being unclean from that touch, instead Jesus' power transforms the man and he becomes clean. He was healed. And then after he was healed in Luke chapter 5, he tells that man to go and show yourself to the priest after he was healed. But here it's sort of reversed. That's not what happens. Jesus never goes over to them. And in fact, he never says, be healed. He only says, go show yourself to the priest. Now, the reason why this is important, showing yourself to the priest, is because the priests were the ones who would declare a person was clean or unclean. If a leper was cured somehow, he could go and show himself to the priest. And there was actually a certain protocol that they would follow to examine all the skin on a person to make sure that there was no more leprosy. Now, 10 people showing up to the priest, that would cause a stir. They would all hear that Jesus had done this. So that was one part of this. But the problem with Jesus telling them right then to go show themselves to the priest is they could look and say, but my body's covered in leprosy. Why would I go to the priest like this? I'll make a fool of myself. I might be punished even for exposing the priest to myself in this condition. So the implication of Jesus' command is that as they go, by the time that they got there, they would be cleansed. So within the command is this implication that if you go, you'll be cleansed. But they had no guarantee that that would be the case. So they just had to start walking. Jesus is forcing them to demonstrate faith, to demonstrate trust, so that he can heal them. And not only that, but to heal them without even touching them, to heal them at a distance. And yes, sometimes the Lord does ask us to start walking so that he can work in our lives. Luke tells us next, at the end of verse 14, as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. So all the lepers were cleansed while they were walking. They all demonstrate faith, some faith, at least, they didn't have a lot to lose. They demonstrated some faith. So as they went, they're all cleansed. But when it dawns on them all, when they realize, hey, I feel different. Hey, you look different. Luke says specifically, when this man saw that he was healed, he stops. Before he gets to the priest, Luke says, right when he saw it, he comes back right then, praising God in a loud voice. And we don't know how far away they are. They might be close by the village, 30-minute walk, an hour, I don't know. Or they might be further away. We don't know how far they are, but he turns around, he comes back to look for Jesus, finds Jesus, comes back, loud voice, praising God. In verse 16, he threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Literally, the 9? Where? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, rise and go. Your faith has made you well, or made you whole. See, the detail about the Samaritan is withheld right up until the end of the story. You know, up until this point, it's just a man who had obviously recognized that his healing came from Jesus, through Jesus, at a distance, and he returned giving praise to God. But then we learn he's a foreigner. He's not a Jew, which raises a couple of questions about where this guy was supposed to go to show himself to the priest. I mean, the way that Luke says it, and he was a Samaritan, implies that the other people who were cleansed, maybe all of them, but at least some of them were Jews. And for Jews, if they were going to show themselves to the priests, then most natural place to do this would have been in Jerusalem at the temple. And I'm not saying that's the only place you could have found a priest, but that is the most natural place that you would go, to the temple. But then where's the Samaritan supposed to go? We don't really know. It raises the issue, though, like where was he going to go? Because he can't get into the temple. He was a foreigner. And by the way, the word foreigner here is not derogatory in any way. It just highlights the fact that of all people, he would not be able to go into the temple in Jerusalem to show himself to a priest. He wasn't allowed access because of his ethnicity. So that begs the question, where was this guy supposed to go? The Samaritans had their own temple on Mount Gerizim, so was he supposed to go there? And this was a huge question, a huge dividing point between Jews and Samaritans. Where should you go to worship? And against this cultural backdrop, the action of the Samaritan is all the more startling because he doesn't travel to a temple. Where does he go? To Jesus. In the person of Jesus, the divide between the Jews and the Samaritans is mediated because the proper place to give praise to God is not in this or that building anymore. It's at Jesus' feet. Jesus fills the role of the temple. I mean, he says, go show yourself to a priest. Does he show himself to a priest? Well, yeah, he does. Jesus fills a role as the temple because he is now the primary center of God's powerful presence manifested in the world. And this outsider who was barred from God's presence in the temple can actually get closer to the presence of God than the other Jews because he returns to Jesus. And the other 9 did not. We're not told the reason why the other 9 did not return. And we probably shouldn't assume that they didn't have any faith because the story tells us that all of them were healed. And Jesus says we're not all 10 cleansed. So they're all healed. They all expressed some measure of faith in order to be healed. But it's that somehow their faith was incomplete because it didn't come back full circle to gratitude. And why didn't it? I've always puzzled over this. The only reason we're given in the story as to why they didn't return has to do with the fact that one's a Samaritan and the others were Jews. The one that returned was a Samaritan. But what is it about that makes a difference when it comes to gratitude? There's something about this distinction between insiders and outsiders that makes a difference when it comes to gratitude. And if you look at what the Samaritan does, there's a clue in the text. When he comes to Jesus, what he does is he throws himself down at his feet. There's several people in Luke's gospel who do this. The woman who weeps over Jesus' feet in Luke 7. The woman with the issue of blood, I think in Luke 8. The synagogue leader, I think, throws himself at Jesus' feet. I think that's Luke 8 also. So there's several people who throw themselves down at Jesus' feet. It's an expression of profound humility, of reverence. And there's something about that the humility of the Samaritan that feeds into or paves the way for deep gratitude. It's not that the other lepers were completely ungrateful. If you think about it, If you were to go find the other 9 and ask them, hey, are you grateful that you were healed? I mean, I would imagine that they would say, sure, I feel grateful. I'm really grateful that I'm healed. I'm grateful that I get to see my family again, or grateful that I get to embrace my kids. You know, they were probably very grateful. I don't think anyone likes to say no to that question, by the way. Are you grateful? Nope. Nope. Not grateful. Not me. Ungrateful. That's me. Yep. Just really not grateful. If I were to put how much gratitude I have on a scale of 1 to 100, it'd be 0. That's how much gratitude. No. Nobody likes to say I'm ungrateful. No. I think they would have said, no, I feel grateful. I think the real difference between the Samaritan and the Jews was the possibility that the Jews were healed because they were Jews, because they had followed the law, or because they worshiped God rightly. There was a possibility of the Jews thinking, well, I was healed in part because of me. And if in any way you think, well, this part of this was because of me, then that undermines gratitude. Now, we don't know what was in the minds of the other 9, but we do know that earlier in the gospel, in Luke chapter 4, Jesus goes to his hometown in Nazareth and preaches a sermon, and part of his sermon was about how God had healed a foreign leper. God had healed a foreign leper named Naaman in 2 Kings 5 in the Old Testament, even though he didn't deserve it. And the hometown crowd didn't like that, so much so that they tried to throw Jesus off a cliff. So it is totally possible for these Jewish lepers who were healed to think to themselves, it's because we're children of Abraham, it's because we're insiders, so we kind of deserved this. I'm grateful, but part of this was because of me. And this is the one thing that the Samaritan doesn't have as a possibility. This is not a possibility for the Samaritan. There is no way the Samaritan thought, oh, you know why I was healed? It's because I'm a Samaritan. No. No way. I was healed in spite of that. I was healed in spite of me. In no way did I deserve this. And what this means is that this foreigner has a greater potential for gratitude because of the humility that says, I didn't deserve this at all. Humility that makes him fall at Jesus' feet and say, thank you. This was all you, and all I can do is say thank you. I was doing some research on this, and I came across this study that was done at the University of California, Riverside. And the researchers set up 3 different studies measuring the interaction between gratitude and humility, what they defined as low self-focus. Just a low focus. You're not down on yourself. You're just not focused on yourself. You're focused on others. And they have a way to measure that. And they don't ask somebody, do you have humility? That's not the way they measure it. So there's lots of studies that have measured gratitude, how it affects your life. But what these researchers did was measure humility alongside gratitude. And sure, higher humility at the beginning of the study actually did result in slightly higher scores on gratitude. But also, after 2 weeks of everybody doing a gratitude practice, what they found was the increase in gratitude for the high humility group was way higher. In other words, they had a much greater potential for the experience of gratitude. Not only that, but then they reversed the experiment with a different group. And they learned that practicing gratitude actually reduced the overall self-focus of the whole group, which kind of makes sense. Because if you're going to give thanks, you got to kind of focus on the contributions and strengths of other people, not yourself. So they did a 3rd study measuring both together over time on a daily basis, and basically concluded that they could predict one another, that high humility could give rise to greater gratitude after that, which could give rise to lower self-focus. So that was an upward spiral. They were mutually reinforcing. Interesting study. And of course they are mutually reinforcing. Our gratitude to God is directly related to how much we think God owes us. And you might not think of it this way, how much we think we deserve. It's hard to be thankful for anything that you feel you deserve. And you might say, well, Collin, I don't know about this. I don't think I deserve anything. I don't think God owes me anything. Oh, maybe so. But then we get frustrated when circumstances don't work out, don't we? We get upset or mad when we meet illness or pain or suffering or things don't go to our plan. Why? Well, because there's a version of Christianity that says that obeying God obligates God to make your life smooth and pleasant. And it's totally possible for the other 9 lepers to have been thinking, man, I never deserved leprosy. I was a good, faithful Jew. This was unfair. I did not deserve leprosy. I'm healed, and that's good. Now we're even. Now we're back to the way it should be. And some people feel that God has failed them in some way if life doesn't go to plan. And the anger and the frustration that we feel at life is really because we think God owes us something. And the assumption might be as simple as God owes me a good and comfortable life. But he does not. And to embrace the truth that I am truly owed nothing in this life, that like the Samaritan leper, my life was essentially forfeit before Jesus came along. The disease I had wasn't leprosy, it was sin, and it was much, much worse, with no cure to speak of, except that Jesus offers me grace if I call out to him, Master, have pity on me, heal me, make me whole. And the price of the cure was death, which he paid anyway. And now, can you imagine, after all that, me thinking God owes me anything? How out of order would that be? Humility says, oh, I owe him everything because I didn't deserve that. I deserved to die in my sin. That's what I deserved, the leprosy. That's what I deserved. I owe him everything, and I'm owed nothing in return because it's true. Because it's true. Humility traces every gift back to the giver. Everything that's good in my life is an undeserved blessing from his hand. And the proper response is thanks and praise. And even in difficult times, when I have lost much, I see that I have not lost all. I still have Christ. I don't see all the things that God does, but I know he's doing good for me. And the things that make me long for heaven, make me long to leave this world, okay? Well, those things are working into my heart hope and longing that will not be disappointed. You think about it, if my kid says to me, Dad, I don't see all the things you do, but I know you're doing good things for me and for our family. Thank you, Daddy. Well, that's just like the situation we're in with our Heavenly Father. I don't see all the good things that you do for me, God. But for what I don't see, thank you, because I know you're doing good things for me. And gratitude helps us be aware, to see, to notice all around us the good things he has given us, even in the midst of the moments where we can't see much that's good. Psalm 107 says, the first 2 verses, and this is in the ESV. We read it earlier in the service. It's a little bit different in the ESV. It says, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from trouble." Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. If they've been helped and rescued by the Lord, let them say so. All 10 were rescued. But it seems that only the Samaritan came back to say so. The real difference, I don't think, was in the feeling. Perhaps the other 9 felt grateful, but the real difference was in the saying so. Expressing the gratitude. You can feel grateful all day long, but until you express it, there is something incomplete about it. There's a version of gratitude where you acknowledge the good things in your life and you feel happy about those good things. You might have gotten in your car this morning and said, I'm grateful for seat heaters in cars. Okay, it's a good thing in your life, you're happy about it, okay? You're happy about the seat heater. That's okay. Bring into mind good things that you're happy about. That's not the same thing as expressing gratitude to a person and saying, you did this for me, and not because I deserved it, and I want to say thank you. There was a contestant at the end of the Great British Bake Off in the final episode, and the contestant didn't win, but said in the final interview, I'm grateful, really blessed, I'm grateful. And that was a way of saying, I'm happy about this good thing. But there's a difference in that and in tracing it back to a person, and that contestant going to his mother who was at the final, and him saying, which I'm sure he did, Mom, thank you. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. And it makes a difference when we say so. And you might think of yourself as a grateful person, but when's the last time you expressed that to someone and said, you know what? I owe you. You remember that time? You might not know it, but you helped me move forward. Thank you. You're not just saying to someone, you did a good job. That's encouragement. That's not gratitude. Gratitude is, I didn't deserve this. I'm in debt to you for what you did for me. I wasn't entitled to it. I'm not trying to pay you back. What you did to help me get by, help me move on, help me get out of that, I can't pay you back for that. Thank you. That's all I can say is thank you. Now, your pride sometimes has to take a hit for you to express gratitude like that. Because your pride is going to say, you could have done that without them. I mean, it might feel a little bit like confessing gratitude rather than expressing gratitude. Like I'm admitting I needed help, admitting that maybe I wouldn't be where I am if it hadn't been for someone else. And sometimes it makes us uncomfortable to have a true debt of gratitude. You know, we want to try to pay it all back so we don't have a debt of gratitude to anybody. It makes us uncomfortable to really need other people or to feel like they have helped us out. But you know, in the rearview mirror of your life and successes, whether professionally, financially, academically, you know, all of those things, there are dozens of people who facilitated your progress in life. And sometimes it's good to go back, to turn around and go back and say so. I mean, think about what it would look like for you to go back to your adult children, your parents, your brother, sister, coworkers, teachers, old friends, and say, I owe you a debt of gratitude. I didn't deserve it. I might not have been able to accomplish what I've accomplished without your help, and I want to say thank you. It makes a difference to say so, not just feel grateful, but to say so. And acknowledging somebody else's role is not weakness, it's maturity. And expressing the gratitude closes the gratitude loop, so to speak. You might feel grateful generally, but if you don't circle back to say so, then the surprising thing is that can be experienced as ingratitude. This is absolutely crucial to understand, especially in relationships. You might feel grateful, but if you don't say so, you are sending the message of ingratitude. And you probably know this because you've experienced it. You know, your spouse does not feel appreciated because you feel grateful. In fact, you can feel grateful a lot, but it might be easier for you to say something about how something could have been better rather than acknowledging the good and saying, thank you. And until you express gratitude, it might be experienced by others as ingratitude. That's important. Like the other 9, they might have felt grateful, but they usually get pegged as the ungrateful ones, don't they? Because they didn't circle back to say so. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from trouble. There is something about trouble that makes us take fewer things for granted, doesn't it? Car trouble makes us feel more grateful for our car. I wonder if the Samaritan, ever took it for granted again that he could embrace his family and friends that he had been separated from for so long. I know a few years ago, we took it for granted that we could gather with family on Thanksgiving. We don't take it for granted after 2020. You probably have some of those things in your life where you have loss or trouble. And weirdly, it's paved the way for some gratitude. I don't take it for granted that I get to see my kids grow up because my dad didn't get to see me grow up. You know, the valley of the shadow usually makes us more grateful for the green pasture and the quiet waters. And I trace it all back to God's mercy, and I say, thank you, Lord, and forgive me when I forget to say so. Let's not forget to circle back and say so this week. Express it to others in words or in writing. And as you give thanks to God, share your thanks to God with someone else. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. That's what it says in the NIV. Don't just say so to God. The Psalms show us that we also need to say so to others, what God has done for us. So as we close, I wanted to give you a moment to give thanks. This is going to be our response time, as it were. I'm going to put a slide on the screen for you that's just got some prompts, some things that you might want to give thanks for. These are just prompts to begin the flow of gratitude. And I want you to write down your gratitude so that you can share it with others later. You need to share it. And if you don't have anything to write with and you want to write with it on your phone, that's okay. I'll give you a pass on taking out your phone during the response time, okay? But I want you to write some of it down so that then you can go back and say so. Say, hey, one of the things I wrote down was about you. Or you might want to share it with another person. Hey, one of the things I wrote down that God has done for me is this, and I want to share that with you. So as you're getting ready, let's pray and we'll give thanks. Heavenly Father, we give thanks for the goodness of this day and this hour and for the Spirit within us and among us. Lord, we turn to you. We trace every gift back to your merciful hands. And in this time, we lift our hearts to you, Lord, and we give thanks. Take a moment to give thanks.